Hey, it's Archronos here, and I want to do something a little bit different than the kind of normal videos that I release on YouTube. I think it's time we have a little talk about The Last of Us Remake that is being released soon by Naughty Dog. Before I talk about this subject at length, I have to disclose that I work in the video games industry. I'm not employed by Sony or Naughty Dog or any subsidiary of either of them. And anything I express in this video is just me sharing my opinions, and it's not representative of the opinions of the company that employ me. Unless you've been living under a rock for the past week, and regardless of your interest in The Last of Us, it's almost impossible that you would have been blind to the fiery debate around the remake of The Last of Us Part 1. From arguments over whether Joel should be able to prone and dodge, the removal of multiplayer, the price point of the remake, and gameplay leaks ahead of Naughty Dog's official unveil of the remake, has the internet engaged in passionate debate. I've been a huge fan of the franchise ever since its release in 2013. I have fond memories of completing it with some friends in launch week, taking turns to pass around the controller when someone died. We completed that game in 2 nights, and after everyone went home, I started my own playthrough straight away, because I wanted to experience that game all over again on my own, and I knew right there I'd find a franchise that was special to me. Before I talk about the remake debate, it's important to talk about the game's roots. The Last of Us Part 1 was a massively successful title released in June 2013 for the PlayStation 3 as a Sony exclusive. That is over 9 years ago, and we're already through 2 more console generations since that game's release. The Last of Us Part 1 was one of the last big exclusives for PlayStation 3, as PlayStation 4 would be released in mid to late November of that same year. The Last of Us launch was an international success, with 3.4 million units shipped within its first month, cementing it as the fastest selling new IP in PS3 history. Critics praised it for its handling of story, visuals, sound, and depiction of adult themes. The majority of critics awarded it the highest accolades possible and established it as one of Sony's strongest exclusive franchises. By October 2019, The Last of Us had sold over 20 million copies across PS3 and PS4. This factors in sales from The Last of Us Remastered, which released in July 2014, 1 year after the original game's release. The Last of Us Part 2 would also emulate the critical success of the first game 7 years later in June 2020, launching during COVID-19 to hugely positive reviews, although fans will be divided over the direction of the story and handling of significantly pivotal moments. I don't think it's necessary to broach that subject again today, as every aspect of the sequel's controversies have been talked about at length, and I think it's important that focus is on the discussion around the remake.
How do I get up there? There's too many of these assholes. Hold on, Tommy.
The remake debate centers around 5 main topics. The price point for the remake, the removal of the faction's multiplayer mode, The Last of Us Remastered makes the remake unnecessary, lack of communication from Naughty Dog, and general upset that studio focus has been on past projects and not new games. Muddying the waters and making the debate ever more intense are a collection of bad actors, various people who have fanned the flames for karma, article clicks, and video views. And it's not hard when reading through the debate to also identify people who don't actually own a PlayStation and are keen to see the project go through a hard failure. So let's explore the main topics in some detail. The price point is one of the biggest drivers of the debate. You'll have seen $70 quoted everywhere on social media in the past week as angry fans rebel over what they see as an unjustified request for a full-price game release. In Europe, where I live, the price is actually higher. The euro and the US dollar at the moment are more or less 1-to-1, and Sony are requesting $79.99 for the base edition and $89.99 for the digital deluxe. That's about $80 and $90 respectively, So European players are actually paying a higher rate than some of the most passionate price debaters. Game pricing for a region will generally follow a norm, and will also factor in things like the market exchange rate. It's also an important call out to note that European pricing usually includes VAT or tax already factored into the end price, while US purchases will add that afterwards, and will also depend on what US state it's being purchased in. We're in a world right now on the brink of another recession. Some argue the recession's already started, with increases in basic living provisions like groceries and fuel. With some people facing financial hardship because of various factors within their personal lives, it's not hard to understand that pricing for a game release is a sore point, and that's before we even talk about it being a remake of an older game. Money's also going to mean a lot of different things to different people. If you're an adult in full-time employment and you have your bills paid and money left over, $70 isn't going to mean the same to you as it might mean to a kid who has the budget for 1 to 2 AAA games every 6 months, or someone who doesn't have any spare money at all and has to live vicariously through other people. This is where things get a bit more intricate to discuss. If you think this is a hugely overpriced release, you have to ask yourself if you really are the target audience. Did you enjoy The Last of Us Part 1 when it was first released? Do you own the original game for PS3 or the backwards compatible PS4 remaster from 2014? Have you played either of them recently? If you find yourself answering yes to more than one of these questions, there's a high likelihood you probably aren't who Naughty Dog are targeting with this release. If you're answering yes to more than one of these questions, then you have to think about what it is you want from a remake. There's no denying that AAA gaming is becoming more and more expensive with every passing year. As the bar of what a fan expects a AAA game to have gets higher every year, games that want that heavenly acceptance as an S-tier release have to spend increasingly longer periods of time in development, and this comes with huge overheads. Studios employ literally thousands of people, from character riggers to sound engineers, QA testers to social media specialists. Developers have personal lives just like you. They have families, kids in school or childcare, car repayments, mortgages, medical bills, all of the expenditure you have as an average person. Studios also have investors that back them, and those investors expect to make revenue as well. For many years, AAA gaming held a $60 price tag for quite a long time, arguably longer than the industry was actually expected to maintain that price. It wasn't until 2020 that the first rumours of a higher price tag would be mentioned, with both Microsoft and Sony supporting the move. Higher price tags mean pleased investors, and in turn a studio is able to make back a lot of the money that was invested in development across a typical 4 to 5 year cycle. And that's at minimum for many of the higher tier games being released. And it's only going to get longer and more expensive in the years to come. So by raising the price of games, this at least allows a hugely expensive industry to continue to sustain a risky development cycle that has seen many studios bank everything behind a release that ultimately didn't land with gamers and resulted in their financial failure and eventual closure, with catastrophic job losses. With longer development cycles now being an industry norm, the remaster and remake of older titles has been a way to sustain cash flow and also continues to make well-loved titles of previous years accessible to new audiences, as well as existing fans who want a more modern representation of their favourite games. When it comes to The Last of Us Part 1 Remake, it's very clear who Naughty Dog are aiming the remake at. It's no secret that HBO have a highly anticipated Last of Us TV series in development, starring the Mandalorian star Pedro Pascal as Joel, and Game of Thrones star Bella Ramsey as Ellie. This series should be released in the spring of 2023, and here's a sobering fact you may not be aware of. As of April 2022, which is just 3 months ago, HBO Max and HBO have access to a customer base of 76.8 million subscribers. You heard me right. Almost 77 million people watch those networks. Factor in that The Last of Us has managed to sell around 20 million units in 9 years, and it's not hard to see why this upcoming TV series is a marriage made in heaven for the Last of Us franchise. Let's be realistic, of course. All 77 million HBO subscribers are not going to watch The Last of Us. There'll be HBO viewers who don't like gore or shows about monsters. There'll be viewers who don't like scary shows, and I'm absolutely certain there's going to be viewers who despise Pedro Pascal or Bella Ramsey, absurd as that may sound. So there's not going to be 77 million viewers of The Last of Us on HBO. But what there is going to be in massive numbers are an absolute ton of people asking a question that you will think of as absurd, but those new viewers are going to be asking, what is this TV show based on, and how can I find out more about it? This is ridiculous to hear for a hardcore gamer who follows every Sony or Xbox release, but you can be 100% sure that there are people out there who will love that TV show and haven't played anything beyond John Madden or Fortnite, and they're going to want to see what the roots of this game are. For a new fan experiencing The Last of Us for the first time, they're paying what is unfortunately a normal price point for a new game release. If you're a Last of Us veteran, you had the luxury of experiencing the game when it was new. Maybe you played the remaster as well when you got your PS4. You have that important nostalgia to look back on, and an expectation of what you want in a new Last of Us game. A new fan coming to the franchise has no basis at all. They don't have that guiding North Star you have, where you remember Joel couldn't prone but Ellie could in the sequel, or how brightly that rooftop scene in the sunshine was before the remake added proper lighting and cast shadows. A new fan knows absolutely nothing about the game, and if they're going to buy it for their new PlayStation 5, it has to look like a 2022 game. As painful as it may be to hear, the original release and the remaster do not look like modern games, nor do they look like they are the games that birthed The Last of Us 2, which refines the gameplay and character development to a superior level and completely changes combat. It's hard for a lot of people in this debate to look back at those older games and not be blinded by nostalgia. Those games have aged well, but they're also almost 10 years old now. It's critical that you remember those new fans don't have any of your history. They only know the TV show, and now they want to play the game of it. And the remake is stepping up to the plate to offer them that 2-game introduction to everything you know and love. Another sore point for many people is the removal of factions multiplayer. This was originally part of The Last of Us Part 1 when it was released in June 2013, and it received frequent updates in both the original release year and also in the remastered release cycle. The multiplayer mode was very popular with many Last of Us fans, so it has been difficult to understand why it was removed from the remake, and results in the remake being frequently slated for being 2/3 of the original content. This is where we get into thinking about how a studio thinks, smart development decisions, and spending money wisely. It's a well-known fact that the spiritual successor to Factions is in development at Naughty Dog. Originally planned as a multiplayer mode for The Last of Us Part 2 that grew monstrously out of scope and ended up being moved to become a standalone project, it's been in development now for at least a few years, and with the company focused now on shipping The Last of Us Remake, it will most likely not be released until well into 2023. This leaves Naughty Dog with a decision. Do they resurrect Factions from the original release, give it a graphical facelift, and relaunch with a remake? Keep in mind that this will also need some post-launch support as well, in terms of a skeleton development team for patches and bug fixes. Or do they hold back on multiplayer, like they did with The Last of Us Part 2, which shipped with no multiplayer mode, and focus on delivering a superior multiplayer experience that incorporates all of the gameplay advancements in The Last of Us Part 2, and comes much closer to the vision of what they think multiplayer in The Last of Us should be now in 2023. No company who hopes to still turn profit will split development like this, so it's really a question of focusing on one and letting the other die. It unfortunately doesn't make any sense to bring back this old multiplayer mode with a brand new multiplayer experience on the horizon, split development resources, and support something that will ultimately be abandoned by both players initially and Naughty Dog in the long run when the new multiplayer project launches and player numbers for the remake's multiplayer dwindle. Many remastered fans are adamant that the remake has no justified place. They see the remake as being unnecessary, since the game has already had a visual upgrade in the past. There's two things going on here, and they interact closely with each other. The first is a combination of either a lack of understanding on the differences between remakes and remasters, or secondly, the terms are being casually used interchangeably until they no longer have any clear meaning, despite being very different approaches to a game's development. So, what do we mean when we think about remasters and remakes? A remaster is a visual refresh of an older game. This is where you'll usually see older titles that had lower resolutions when they were released, updated to support newer hardware and technology. The support of 4K resolutions are often a marketing staple of a big remaster undertaking. Character models get a visual overhaul and end up looking better, with high-res textures to make them more visually attractive and much closer to the original vision the designers and artists had when the game was envisioned, but just didn't have the hardware to support it. Typically, you don't see that many new feature additions to a remaster, and mechanics generally aren't altered. A remake, on the other hand, substantially changes the original game. Remakes are generally aimed at the latest hardware only, and mechanics can be changed or improved. Visuals and audio can be remade and re-recorded. It's not uncommon to completely redo cutscenes and change how models move and react. Finely tuned nuances like facial animation and eye movement can be introduced to push emotion to the forefront of character development, where it just wasn't possible under the original hardware. A great example of a fairly recent successful remake would be the Resident Evil 2 remake released in 2019 to critical acclaim.
Done.
Fierce discussions online try to decide whether the remake is actually a remaster or a remake. Bad actors who don't have any interest in the success of the remake will generally argue that this is a remaster. Not everyone claiming that it's a remaster is a bad actor, of course. There's undoubtedly going to be Last of Us fans who are disappointed with the remake and wish Naughty Dog had done more than they are planning to do with it, and it's not my place to change those opinions. People have a right to be disappointed. Games are an art form, and you should have the right to your interpretation of what you see. But it's also inappropriate to be a bad actor in this debate and diminish the hard work Naughty Dog have put in to bring this remake to life. Smaller projects like this allow staff to develop and take on new responsibilities. For example, Matthew Gallant is directing The Last of Us remake. He was previously a lead systems designer on The Last of Us Part 2, and he started at Naughty Dog as a designer on the original Last of Us. If you're a Last of Us fan, wouldn't you want to see what kind of visions someone that worked on the original game's design could bring to a remake as a director? Think big picture. Imagine you end up loving the remake more than the original or Last of Us Part 2. Wouldn't you want to see the developers involved in the remake go on to make bigger and better games at Naughty Dog? It is, of course, important to note, as always, games don't come from one person, of course, and they're a representation of a united effort of hundreds of people to produce one single vision. Communication is a difficult topic to broach for any game studio. Gamers expect information and answers. The games industry is international. Fans are spread across the world, across every conceivable time zone, and the internet unites them all to make a rabid, constantly hungry fan base that will devour any and all information and media that they can get their hands on for a game that they're excited for. Leaked screenshots and videos will be consumed instantly and regarded as fact before a game studio can have a chance to react. To understand why a game studio doesn't immediately respond to requests for information, screenshots and videos, you need to think about how a game studio is structured. When you speak to a game studio on social media, the messaging that they provide to you is certainly a representation of what the studio want to say to you. But this will be a person who specializes in working with the community in a social media setting. They'll provide messaging to you that is endorsed to be provided to you, and they won't engage you on topics that they aren't ready to discuss yet. Game studios are comprised of many working parts that interlink with each other, and support each other to produce games. It's an incredible end result that brings together design, engineering, art, sound, QA testing, legal, marketing, and social media, among many others. This is where we return to the crux of the problem. In the wake of the well-publicised leaks over the last couple of weeks, where gameplay was spoiled before Naughty Dog was ready to unveil it, why didn't Naughty Dog respond sooner than they did? With us being on the outside, it's inappropriate to speculate on what happened, but we can think about the factors that make instant responses to a situation quite difficult. Communication by any successful studio goes through serious vetting before you receive it. Logs and trailers are storyboarded and written days or weeks in advance, and they're intensively reviewed by developers, legal, marketing, and many other figureheads to ensure the messaging covers everything that's intended. Naughty Dog is also a Sony-owned studio, so Sony will have their own input on the messaging and the timing. As we saw with the Remake blog when it was released, Sony made the announcement themselves and introduced Naughty Dog's reveal. That all takes a lot of coordination and timing. We will not be able to say when that blog publish was originally scheduled, but it was likely to be published very soon, with the Remake being released in September, and the leaks went on to spoil that. Again, bad actors capitalized on this and reported that this blog was damage control. It just isn't possible in a studio to produce a blog and video with the blessing of a publisher like Sony in the turnaround that Naughty Dog managed. Upset Naughty Dog developers could be seen on social media confirming this wasn't the case in the wake of the blog and the public reaction to it. The takeaway in communication within a game studio is that it's a very complicated process involving many departments, many that don't even work directly on the game being made, all coming together at the same time. It's a very slow process of iteration, and it's often subject to last-minute delays. It's not always easy to explain to an upset gamer why those delays have happened. Naughty Dog handled the leak situation as best as could be managed, and they're undoubtedly still looking into the situation on an internal basis to determine how the leaks happened and what actions need to be taken, long after the internet have lost interest and moved on. The last major aspect of the argument that needs to be covered is the disappointment and upset that Naughty Dog are focusing on remaking an older game like The Last of Us Part 1, instead of making The Last of Us Part 3, or Uncharted 5, or another new IP that we've never seen before. Game studios do not work like this, with the entire studio focused on one single project and no other work being done. You can bet Naughty Dog has at least 3 to 4 projects in development at the moment. You may never see any of them depending on how development goes. That's just the cold fact of how game development works, especially in the field of AAA development. Sometimes game projects never succeed at all and they get cancelled long before they're ever revealed. Other times, the best parts of a new game get taken and they get used to make another existing game in development even stronger than it was, instead of having 2 weak projects hurting each other. A game studio will split itself up into multiple teams, with each team working on an upcoming project. A developer doesn't necessarily have to stay with one team. They may work on different teams depending on their speciality, sometimes working on one project, and sometimes working on another. When you get close to the launch date of a new game, it's normal that one or more teams that aren't directly part of the team releasing the new game to also help out and work on the project as well. So that is the one time when claims can be made that everyone is working on one game only, and they could actually be true at that time. But this is usually just to get the last minute aspects of production finished so that the game can ship. And then once it's released and being played by players across the world, the teams who weren't part of that game development will return to their own projects, and the team who actually made the game will usually switch to supporting the game in its new launch, with work on stuff like day 1 patches, or whatever they intend to do for the first major patch of the game. Remakes do not rob us of newer games. Those projects are still coming, and remakes will support their continued development. There'll be developers working on a new game that will never work on the remake at any stage of development. Games are in development for many years before we even find out that they exist. Rockstar only recently confirmed the next chapter of Grand Theft Auto was in development, but you can bet it was being worked on long before we were informed as players. The purpose of this video isn't to neutralize any of the debate around the remake.
Tattoo shop.
Discussions are healthy in any game community, both for fellow players to interact and share thoughts and opinions, and also let the developers get a pulse on what community thoughts are and what the overall health of a game in development is. Even negative discussion has its place. This video just seeks to provide an understanding on a lot of commonly misunderstood aspects of game development in relation to the remake, and maybe provide some positive reaction to everything going on in a sea of overwhelming negative discussion. There's going to be a lot of excited Naughty Dog and Last of Us fans looking forward to the remake. My hope is that even if one of those fans thinks this video is cool, then it's hit the mark that I went for. If you made it this far, I'd like to thank you sincerely for engaging with me on this, and letting me voice my own thoughts and opinions on the remake and everything going on right now in the Last of Us community. I own both the original and the remastered editions of Last of Us 1, but they're disc format, and I'm on a digital PS5 now, so I'm hugely excited to grab this remake and enjoy one of my all-time favourite games again in its updated glory. And I hope if you end up picking up the remake, you enjoy it as well. Thanks a lot for watching.
Good night, kid.